Welcome. All right, just going to give it another minute or so. Welcome, everyone. Tell us where you're joining us from today in the chat. Okay. Ooh, all right, Maryland, New York, Michigan. Okay. Ooh, Connecticut. All right. All right. Well, everyone. Oh, hello, Brooklyn. Okay, let's get it started, okay? Again, welcome, everyone. Let's see. Welcome to today's webinar, Breaking Barriers, Breast Cancer Survival Rates in the Black Community and the Need for Black Scientists and Research. I am Megan Claire Chase, and I am SHARE's Breast Cancer Program Director and host of our BC Life podcast. Plus, I am also an invasive lobular breast cancer survivor. Now, before our fabulous presentation begins, I'd like to tell you a little bit about SHARE. We're a national nonprofit that supports, educates, and empowers anyone diagnosed with breast or gynecologic cancers and provides outreach to the general public about signs and symptoms because no one should have to face breast, ovarian, uterine, cervical, or metastatic breast cancer alone. For more information about upcoming webinars, support groups, podcasts, and our helplines, please visit our website at sharecancersupport.org. Now, we have a few reminders for you, some housekeeping, okay? All participants, you will be muted during the presentation, but a reminder, the chat is enabled, so feel free to write comments and engage with each other and make sure that you select everyone in the drop-down box when using the chat. Now, once our brilliant Dr. Melvin finishes presenting, he'll begin the Q&A discussion, so please submit any questions that you have through that Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And remember that our speaker cannot give specific medical advice, so make sure to keep your questions general. And let's see, we also have closed captioning, and you can enable this feature by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and select the subtitle option. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and we will share this in a few weeks with all the registrants, and it'll also be added to our website. So now, everyone, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Diva Melvin to introduce herself. Dr. Melvin, the screen is yours.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Diva Melvin. I am an assistant biology professor at Tougaloo College. I am also a pre-health advisor at Tougaloo College as well, and I hail from Clinton, Mississippi. Now, I want to orientate you to where Tougaloo is because a lot of us don't necessarily know, and that is perfectly fine. We are a small HBCU or historically Black college and university in the area of Jackson, Mississippi, and Jackson, Mississippi is our capital. We pride ourselves on creating the doctors and dentists and optometrists and nurses of Mississippi. And we also have deep roots in the civil rights era. We've had everyone from President Kennedy all the way to Martin Luther King to Tupac to grace our actual grounds of Tougaloo College. And so we have a lot of rich history here at Tougaloo. And why I talk about Tougaloo so much, yes, it's the place that I work, but also it is because I graduated from Tougaloo in 2015. And then after graduation, I decided to go to Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, where I got my PhD. in biomedical sciences with an emphasis in biochemistry and cancer biology. Now, when I was studying or getting my PhD, I studied triple negative breast cancer. And as many of you know, but some of you all may not know, what triple negative breast cancer is one of the subtypes of breast cancer that is the hardest to treat. But unfortunately, it also impacts African American women more. And so it's a health disparity. There are very unclear reasons why it is a health disparity and why it impacts women of color and African Americans more and at younger ages. However, that's what I studied at Meharry, and that's what I chose to continue to study while at Tougaloo. And so, along with studying breast cancer at Tougaloo through various grants that I have, I also teach, and I teach biochemistry, general biology. I teach a whole bunch of biology related things that sometimes people like to stay away from, but I hope that I make it a safe place for people to have education. And I just find true joy in teaching our students that look like me and that will ultimately become the doctors that actually treat me, right? That treat us, that treat our community. And so I hope that I am pouring something into them while I'm giving them a biochemistry test and I'm making them stay up all night, right? But other than that, I actually have a wonderful husband and a wonderful little boy that I was just talking to Megan Claire about. And I told Megan Claire that he's one, but he acts 40 sometimes. So I have two boss men in the house, but it is a great experience. I'm first time mom, so everything is brand new and wonderful. And yes, my bio does say that I love running, but I think I tend to like a little bit more walking on the Natchez Trace. And I love to listen to True Crime podcasts. I'm a Dateline girly. So yes, I'm actually listening to a podcast and I paused it as I was coming into work today. So I say all that to say that's my introduction. I would love to have further introduction and talks about anything additional, but I want to get started today with our conversation. And so I'm going to share my screen. And so the title of my presentation is Breaking Barriers, Breast Cancer Survivor Rates in the Black Community and the Need for Black Scientists. I am a biochemist by training and a cancer biologist by training. I did not go to medical school. However, what I did was learn the science behind cancer, learn the science behind why cancer grows at the rates that they do. And so, what I like to tell people all of the time is that cancer as a whole, cancer has found a very, very good way of maximizing the body's opportunities for growth, right? By definition, cancer is the abnormal growth of cells. And so the body has a very regulated way of actually growing cells. That's the reason why we grow. That's the reason why we grow a certain height. That's the reason why our hair length is a certain length. That is the reason why we don't necessarily expand beyond the means of expansion, and we kind of have the frames that we have because our bodies say, hey, there is no need for a certain amount of growth, or there is a need for a certain amount of growth, right? The what cancer is likened to is actually a fetus in the womb and how fast a fetus develops into a baby. They have to grow very, very fast within that 9 to 10 months or 40 weeks in one day, like my son did. To actually grow in the appropriate amount and actually create a heart, create brain, eyes, ears, lungs, right? And so cancer cells, what they have is that same eagerness to grow like a fetus has to a baby, but the difference is that it's unregulated, right? And when it's unregulated, when it's not controlled, then there becomes a problem. And so that is how I explain cancer as a whole, is that yes, we understand how cells grow. We do not understand what deregulates them. And care in general has to be grounded in the conversation of, all right, these are cancerous cells. Yes, we are looking for markers, and those yield to therapy options that can be maximized to actually treat your cancer. Because sometimes what we see is that there are cancer cells that have certain markers, right? So some of us have heard of ER positive for breast cancer. Some of us heard of PR positive. Some of us have even heard of HER2 positive. All of those acronyms stand for markers that drugs have now targeted. And also, after they've targeted, then they can treat that actual cell that has an abnormal presence of PR, ER, or HER2. And so, when we talk about cancer care and the therapies associated with cancer care, the therapies are targeting something that is not normal in all of our cells, and therefore it's targeting that exact specific marker to say, okay, that is a cancerous cell, and I need to eliminate it. Now, sometimes, like our breast cells, they're always going to have ER, PR, and HER2. Some of our healthy cells actually might get attacked because of those chemotherapies actually targeting the ER, the PR, and the HER2. And so that's why some of us, when we actually go through chemotherapy, our whole body actually feels sick because, again, it's not the fact that these markers are not present normally, it's the abnormal expression of those markers on an actual cancer cell. And so sometimes indirectly, healthy cells are being targeted. And so, as I talk about our breast cancer survival rates, what we do know is that there is an overall 44% decline in breast cancer deaths since 1989. And that's again because scientists have targeted actual markers to say, no, this is abnormal to a cancer cell, and this is normal to a regular breast cell. And so they've developed new advancements in technology. We do have an overall decline in breast cancer care. What we realize is that number one, there is a health disparity as it relates to the death rates for African American women. Now, per 100,000, there is about 127.8 women that are diagnosed yearly with breast cancer. And we know about, of that 100,000, maybe 27.8 women or 28 women are actually going to pass away because of related breast cancer and maybe even metastasis. And so, yes, there is a health disparity when it comes to the actual breast cancer deaths. But what we do not see in our incidence rates are higher incidence reports, right? And simply incidence rates are just reporting that someone has breast cancer. Well, the reason why we actually don't see that reporting there is sometimes multifaceted. We know as African American women that oftentimes we have to manage not only a household, but we have to manage jobs. And so when I say jobs, it's not just the household job that we have to manage, but some women are actually managing and working 2 or 3 jobs. And so it takes a lot for those women to actually, number one, go to the doctor already, and then also to get the cancer care that is necessary. And so oftentimes women that are diagnosed, that oftentimes women, Black women especially, are diagnosed at later stages, not because of the lack of not knowing, but maybe because they're managing, again, a household and several jobs. And so, therefore, they don't have the opportunity or sometimes even the luxury to take a day off and actually go and just get a normal everyday or no, not every day, but yearly check-in. And so that's why I advocate strongly for our women to do your monthly actual breast exams. And so when we talk about monthly breast exams, some people say, okay, well, you can get started when you learn about them. But in my opinion, as African American women, we should be always practicing a monthly breast exam as soon as we learn about our bodies. And so as soon as we learn about our cycles and administration, we should also talk to our young ladies about actually performing monthly breast exams. The reason being is because we want to be very familiar with our bodies by the time we get to 25 or 28, right? Or even 40 or 45 down the line, so that we can always feel like, okay, no, this isn't normal. Or maybe I might need to go get a second opinion about what I'm feeling. And so, what we do know, and what I directly learned, is that as we grow, as we mature, maybe we've had children or things of that nature, when we do our monthly breast exams, we're always going to have changes, right, in our breasts. Maybe it's because we have grown in our size cup. Maybe it's because we're pregnant. Your breasts are going to feel different from different stages in life you'll be in. But just the familiarity of actually doing monthly breast exams by yourself in the shower or laying on the bed is actually going to make you feel more comforting, actually make you feel more empowered to have a voice when you go into the doctor and say, hey, I have been doing my monthly exams for the past year, and it is this month specifically that I feel something is different. And that helps you become not only your own advocate, but also take some of that power away from just listening to the doctor and saying, okay, I'm just going to trust what the doctor has to say. Now, I'm not saying that the doctors are going to be wrong, or I'm not saying that, hey, we shouldn't trust the doctors. But one way to advocate for ourselves and to intentionally seek out care that is appropriate and culturally sensitive is to first understand our own bodies. And that means that we might have to learn a little bit of anatomy, right? And that anatomy doesn't mean that you have to go to medical school or that you even have to take a biology class. But what I am encouraging us is to know our anatomy specific to us. And so, yes, while we have incidence numbers of 127 women per 100,000 being diagnosed every year, what I can say is that this number not only reflects maybe the healthcare inequities that sometimes cultural awareness that sometimes mothers, Black people in general, Black mothers or Black people in general are holding down several different responsibilities that do not allow them to go to the doctor as regularly. And so that is also associated with the Black female death rates as well. Yes, we have a higher number. And I truly believe that this higher number is not because um, we're necessarily getting diagnosed with the worst of the worst breast cancer, but maybe because we are not going to the doctor early enough to actually catch the malignancy or the tumor in its latent or early state. And so, along with looking at those numbers and looking at those rates, we also have survival rates on those and on the back end, right? Actually, because we feel more empowered, we can actually increase those survival rates because we advocate for ourselves. And again, we're doing these check-ins that allow not check-ins, but breast exams, monthly or check-ins for ourselves, right? Monthly check-ins that allow us to feel empowered and know what our bodies do from a month to month basis. And so, also, as I talk about breast cancer survival rates, I also want to talk about the need for Black scientists in research. And so I want to tell you a little bit about my journey before I go into our main things that we have to remember from my conversation. Number one, I wasn't the best at science. Even though I am a biochemist by training, in my high school chemistry class, I distinctly remember that I was one to score very low on my chemistry test. I didn't know why. I felt frustrated, I felt defeated. And honestly, I was at an institution or a high school that a lot of students didn't look like me. And so that group studying that was happening or going on with other with other students, it just didn't happen for me. And so I felt defeated and I cried and cried to my mom and my dad. And they actually said, you know what, Diva, this is not the time to give up, right? They encouraged me to go to seek help from my teacher at the time. And they told him, hey, could she take the test over again? Not in the confinements of maybe the hour that you're giving the test. And they advocated for me and they realized that, oh, well, she kind of knows it. She just kind of has test anxiety. And so from that moment on in high school, I think I was in my 11th or 12th grade year, what I remember is that number one, science does not have to be scary. It's just the fact that, okay, you have to identify your weakness and actually go forth and just forge and push through that weakness. Yes, it was uncomfortable, and I don't even remember what grade I ultimately got in chemistry, but it inspired me to go to get a degree in biology with a lot of chemistry courses because I realized that, oh, I can do this, right? I'm not dumb. I don't have to write off STEM as a whole. And so, what I have, my first part is that a lot of Black doctors, MD and PhD, we have lived experiences very similar, number one, to our patients. And with that being said, our Black doctors, we come from and sometimes have to balance and force through scenarios, just like our patients, of overcoming. But because of our lived experiences, maybe we're in spaces and cultural spaces that don't necessarily align with, where we come from. Because of those lived experiences, we actually search and we search for community. We search to be leaders in our community because we want role models. We want to see role models that actually look like us. And so I want to give us some stats about Black doctors and Black PhDs, or just the MD journey as a whole. To actually be an oncologist, yes, it takes your 4 years of medical school, but an additional 6 years of training to actually become an oncologist MD. For a PhD student, it could take up to 6 to 7 years to actually earn the PhD. And so after we have gone through academia, then we might have to have some life choices, such as going back home to support our families, or also a life choice being, hey, the token of our institution and represent all Black people, right? And sometimes that's a little discouraging, not because we want to, or not because we don't want to, but because a lot of times being the only or the token Black comes with a lot of pressure to be perfect. And so a lot of the MDs, yes, they are the leaders in your community out inside of your everyday communities, like at church or at the grocery store. But oftentimes at their institution, they're also leaders as far as holding positions or making sure that service opportunities actually happen. Black doctors, MDs, and PhDs, what is interesting is that they actually enter academia a little later than other or our other counterparts. And so academia in general is not necessarily the prettiest to actually go into. The reason being is because, as you all know, and I think I can talk a little openly on our conversation today, sometimes the political climate actually influences academia. For instance, with my grants that I have, I actually have one in danger of being lost because it is DEI or it is related to a health disparity. And so that limits the work that I actually can do as it relates to a specific grant, right? While I can always do community outreach, then it becomes a problem because with academia, oftentimes your grants are kind of what pays your bills. And so a lot of our Black doctors, again, MD and PhD, they will actually go into private practices or they will go to for PhDs where you make the most money. And then after you make your money, you retire there. You retire from there, and then you go and teach in academia. And while it is great that we have that volunteer servicehood to actually go back and teach in academia, sometimes that time between us entering academia and us actually practicing in private practice, we miss a lot of students that may look like us that may need mentorship to actually push through our academic challenges. Now, along with that, once you find your actual Black doctor that shows up at your door, maybe you actually um, aren't paired with a Black doctor initially for your oncology treatment or for your family members' oncology treatment. What I do have to say is that we don't have, although we don't have a lot of Black doctors or Black scientists in general, what I can say is that your first option is not your only option. There are three different resources: the National Medical Association, findablackdoctor.com, and blackdoctor.org that actually can locate you a Black doctor in your um in your field, right? Now, I can't necessarily say that the field will be oncology specifically, but there are resources that allow you to find a Black internist or a Black pediatrician or a Black oncologist. The National Medical Association is the oldest and longest surviving Black Medical Association. They actually invite all Black medical students to sign up in their first year, and they track them throughout their matriculation in medical school all the way until they actually finish medical school and actually start practicing. Find a Black doctor is a great resource as well. It locates you and it orientates you in your specific state. And again, you can click from different specialties that will allow you to find a Black doctor, hopefully in your network and also in your state and region. And the same goes with Black doctor. You do not actually pair with a Black doctor. What you need to look for when it comes to cancer care and increasing those breast cancer survival rates is that the person that you are with should make you feel comfortable. That doctor should make you feel comfortable. Their nurses should make you feel comfortable. Even their receptionists should make you feel comfortable. They should be culturally sensitive and competent. A lot of times, those doctors don't necessarily have to come from your community to actually be culturally sensitive and competent. But what they do outside of their doctor their doctor work, right? Their 9 to 5. They should be serving in the community that looks like yours, attending church and having church connections that look like yours, or even have childhood experiences that are very similar to yours. The reason why I'm saying, okay, well, maybe I should ask my doctor a little bit more questions because that doctor is going to, number one, understand what you mean if you say sugar instead of diabetes, right? Or understand what you mean if you say, hey, I have to pick up my grandchildren from this time to this time. And so therefore I need to make rearrangements, right? The goal for a doctor is to have healthy, surviving, and thriving patients. And the way that they actually have that is in alignment with their um, their patient's culture and have cultural sensitivity, as well as being competent in necessarily what every scenario their actual patient goes through, but with scenarios very similar. For instance, with me, while I was pregnant, my doctor, remarkably, I was actually teaching one of her sons, right? Or her only son. And so this was great for me because she knew, number one, how much stress maybe I was going through at school. And so she was always aware and sensitive to the fact of, hey, Dr. Melvin, I know you're teaching from 8 to 5, but maybe for 2 of those hours, make sure that you are sitting down, right? Because I was 8, 9 months pregnant, still at school. I know it was a little crazy, but that let me know that number one, my doctor cared, right? Cared about me beyond caring from whatever day I started caring to January 1. She realized that, okay, she knew the pressures that I was under at school, and therefore she designed care that was culturally sensitive to me and competent to me. She was also a Black woman. And so she knew that, hey, if your mom has high blood pressure and you don't have high blood pressure right now, maybe you need to have classes and even she suggested maybe you need to have a virtual class so that the pressure from the baby are up from 8 to 5 every day. And so that's just an example of cultural care. The last two things that I want to say about increasing our survival rates is pressure gut. A lot of us, again, because we have thought about our cancer care, because we know how our bodies feel when we're on this drug or we're prescribed this medicine. What you can do and what you have the right to do with your doctors is ask for explanation and clarification. My education does not grant me all the wisdom in the world, right? Wisdom comes with understanding and experience. And that is what you as a patient have. You have the experience of taking those drugs in regimen together. You have the experience of going to radiation or chemotherapy. And so, yes, while we should listen to our actual doctors to make sure that we're taking our regimented prescriptions or medicines and going through chemotherapy. We also have our gut. We know what is right for us. And that leads me to that third point in our number 5 of trust your gut. Do not confuse an instruction with disrespect. And I say that because sometimes doctors in general, depending on their bedside manner, could deliver instructions a certain way, right? And again, I'm going to lean back on my experience of having a child. My doctor told me she needed to induce me. I said no. And I did not want to because I didn't want to go on the knife and I was very scared and all these other things. And she was like, well, Diva, I cannot say that I will be here when Amari comes. And she was right. Amari came on January 1. She was on vacation. And guess what? I was scared anyway. And so, me thinking that, oh, I got this, or oh, no, I can plan this the right way, I confused her instruction, her wise advice, with not necessarily disrespect, but thinking that I knew how to do it my own way. And so sometimes we do have to trust the doctors. And the last thing I want to leave us with is encourage our Black youth. This is where I want to return. Um, as I stated before, a lot of times, being an oncologist takes the 4 years that you have in college, the 4 years you have in medical school, and the additional 6 years. So that's 14 years of training. And sometimes that can be a discouraging thought for young people, especially when they say, oh, I want to do the money, or I want to get the money immediately, or I don't want to spend that long time in actual school. Well, what I would encourage you to do is encourage our youth to go to summer camps that are focused on STEM, right? We need our Black doctors, we need our Black scientists in our community looking and having that cultural awareness, cultural competency, and cultural sensitivity when they're actually studying, operating on, and advising patients. It takes a village. Yes, my mother, she is a English major. She knew nothing about STEM. And my father, although he was very great in math, after a certain math, he said, "Hey, Diva, I can't help you anymore." But that's when they lean on my instructors at school or even my mentors at church to actually help tutor me through the math that I needed to. And just because, and this is what I tell all of my students here, just because you are not perfect at it does not mean that it's not meant for you. As I stated before, I wasn't perfect at chemistry. However, I pushed through. And regardless of my struggles that I had in high school, I now stand before you all today as a biochemist and a cancer biologist. And so as I end my conversation, I just have a couple of links to find a doctor. First, the National Medical Association, again, they have a Find a Doctor portal, and you can put in your state and the specialty that you want them to be in. Also, you have similar portals in findadoctor.com and blackdoctor.org. And I wanted to highlight Dr. Olape. She is at the University of Chicago, and she is one of the leading breast cancer researchers and oncologists in the United States. She is doing phenomenal work, not only in the community, but also in the lab to find the differences between African American breast cancer women, patients, and survivors, and their counterparts. She's looking at triple negative breast cancer, and she's looking at subtypes of breast cancer that are specifically associated with African Americans. My name is Dr. Diva Melvin. I'm from Tougaloo College, and below is my email. Thank you so much for allowing me to share a little bit of what I know with you all.
Bravo, bravo, Dr. Melvin. I mean, so many things were impactful. We got a lot of questions submitted ahead of time with registration, and the bulk of them are, how do we, what's the best way to like come together to reach Black women, Black community where they live, because there are just so many limitations with social determinants of health, and also we have to factor in the current administration. What are some things that we can do to bring this information together?
Right. I think that requires having conversations like we're having today. I live in the state of Mississippi. And as we know, I'm laughing because I get very nervous and I have heart palpitations about the state of Mississippi because we are one of those states that did not expand Medicare, did not expand Medicaid, right? We have, instead of food deserts, we have healthcare deserts where women have to drive to Memphis, Tennessee to actually receive care, or they have to drive. And I'm going to use my grandparents as an example. They live in Greenville, Mississippi. In order for them to get dental care, they had to drive to Jackson, Mississippi, 2 hours away to get dental care. And my grandparents are getting older, and therefore that drive is going to become more cumbersome, right? And so I thank my parents that they open up their house so that they can stay. But think about aligning all of your healthcare, your appointments all in the same week, right? And so that is a lot. So what I say, how can we actually disseminate this information? Number one, I think in general, we're gonna have to start doing a village mentality of educating our women as a whole, maybe bringing in resources at church, maybe bringing in resources with our sororities and other organizations that we are affiliated with, because we cannot rely on the current political environment to provide competent care any longer. And I know that is kind of sad.
It is, and again, it's like it shouldn't always be left up to us to make the effort. Is what I like to say, and even in going through my own treatment, being dismissed, my symptoms presented differently. And that's something I wanted to bring up too, for our audience to hear. Because I don't know how many even know my story, but I knew something was wrong for over 2 years and no one believed me. I was dismissed for over 2 years, but I kept pushing. And so I saw a message in the chat from Sharon and saying, you can still do everything right. No, be aware of your body. And still that cancer, can be missed. And what I am, with that cultural competency component and that patient doctor relationship or with your care team is so, so important, because as Black people, our symptoms may present differently. And I do not think, this is my opinion, I do not think our our healthcare system is able to handle that. And what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I totally agree. For instance, BMI. Let's just think about BMI as a general. Everybody is obese under regards to BMI, because that was designed by in 1950 standards, from looking at the typical white American woman, white American man at the time, right? And so our policies, our healthcare system is just now catching up. That is the reason why I was very excited about learning about, okay, we are making efforts in health disparities and we're speaking about it more, because our textbooks are still written for the 1950s white male or white female, right? And that is a problem. Yes, our symptoms do present differently. Yes, do not keep do not say, well, maybe it's nothing, or maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. No, because just as Sharon said, and just as Megan Claire, you said, you knew that something was wrong with your body. And just the fact that you know that something is wrong with your body is justification enough. And that's why I say all is not lost. It's just sometimes we, unfortunately, have to holler a little bit louder, have to fight a little bit more so that we can receive the care that we need. But yes, it is definitely our textbooks currently are still catching up to realizing that health disparities in healthcare has to be looked at differently.
Absolutely. Here, here. So another question is, how do we help promote African American, Black, or Black scientists in research? What can we do to make sure people know they're out there? Because when we often hear, "Oh, we couldn't find anyone," it's like, no, we're out there. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I think that's a dual job. I think sometimes we as a scientist have to kind of toot our own horn a little bit louder, but then also and I hate I always think about like community, right? With community and sharing each other's stories and knowing, oh, her granddaughter is a biochemist, or her granddaughter. That's how we start to learn and connect who is who, and what places our Black doctors are, right? Because our Black doctors are not going to be the front page news, unfortunately, right? Or our Black doctors are not necessarily going to be the ones that are in front of, representation for the institution. And so I think Black doctors as a whole need to be louder and tooting our own horns, but then also as a community, we need to share our knowledge, right? Share our wealth. I know I'm a resource, right? And so I would encourage, folks to use those QR codes that I have to say, okay, let's go to this, National Medical Association. All of these doctors are certified, right? Let's go to these different places so that we can actually know who our Black doctors and scientists are.
So, and I love this question here. How long do you think it will take before there is greater representation of Black scientists How do you think that could be accomplished?
Mm.
Right? I mean, that is.
um, so and again, I believe that okay, so here as my role in at Tougaloo, I'm a part of several different MOU agreements that actually get our Black students into medical schools, right? In this current national climate, I've had three to pull out because they don't want to be sued. They don't want to have hate groups, blasting, the institutions. And so, how long will it take? Well, Martin Luther King says the arc of justice bends long. And so just as long as and if the arc of justice is bending long, then healthcare justice is bending long too. And so I'm not quite sure. We're gonna have to hit our heads a couple of times. But in general, I think as a community, we might have to start, okay, being very intentional um, about where we send our students and where our students will feel safe so that they can matriculate into being Black doctors and being Black nurses. Because at one point in time, everybody knew a Black doctor, right? And
Right.
it was because we had that community that said, all right, you're going to Tougaloo because that's where the doctors are being made, right? Or you're going to Jackson State because that's where the engineers are being made. And so maybe we might have to shift back to that so that but that's a difficult question.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask this other question. So, um, what can you share about finding cancer in the lymph nodes, but not in your breast? I don't know if this is something you can talk about, but oftentimes,
No, no.
like when we say touch, no, it's normal for your
Mm-hmm.
chest or breast. What about lymph nodes? How do we know when something?
Exactly. So if we look right here behind our ear, if everybody's feeling behind our ear, that's the lymph node right there. So behind our ears, sometimes when we get sick, these lymph nodes swell. I'm sorry. Also, underneath our underarms, we have lymph nodes there. And so when I say do a holistic breast exam, I mean, breast tissue can accumulate all the way in the lymph nodes, right? So you have to feel up there. Sometimes your lymph nodes are swollen because you're sick, and then sometimes lymph nodes are swollen because it is letting us know that maybe some type of abnormal growth is growing in that direction. And so, yes, while we do our screenings and we, focus on our breast area, I would say go further up. Feel all the way around. Sometimes we have to stand in front of our mirror naked, raise up our hands, look to the left, to the right, maybe for me, one of my boobs is hanging a little bit different than the other because that's where Amari drank most of his milk from. But hey, get used to all of that so that that shouldn't be right there, right? I would say your body should be explored as far so that you can know your health. That's the
Right,
reason.
right. So, something else I wanted to bring up, the weathering effect. And I know not everyone knows that this is a relatively like new term, so to speak, um, that especially Black women are talking
Mhm.
about. And for those who have not heard of this, the weathering effect, it's really how racism contributes to poor health outcomes and ultimately with our stress levels. And then, ultimately, that's what's feeding cancer, and we end up with a cancer diagnosis. And so I was wondering what your thoughts are to help educate those who don't look like us on what weathering effect is, and then what are some words for those of us that are experiencing it right now?
So for us that are experiencing the weathering effect right now, what I can encourage you with is that it is not your job to make other people, especially in healthcare, feel comfortable. And so what does that mean? You will say, oh, well, I'll sit here and I'll wait. Or no, you can refer me to another person because that is their job. right? That is their job to treat a patient. And if they do not feel that they can do that job, then refer me to another one. That is your responsibility as well. The job of a doctor is to do no harm and to not maliciously intend for harm to be done. And so, number one, I want to say in general that I see you as a PhD, as a scientist. I understand what my research is for. I studied triple negative breast cancer because it's women that look like me that are impacted. I see you. And yes, others are going to see you as well. And again, sometimes as Black women in general, we feel like we have to fight the whole entire world and put it, on our shoulders. But just as our ancestors had done before, they bore a lot of bruises so that we can be where we are. And just think of it as paving the way for other women to have an easier and smoother transition. Now, how do we educate people that don't look like us? Well, I think in general, what needs to happen is that when it comes to patient advocacy, that a Black woman should volunteer and say, no, I'll speak to, the team of doctors, right? Sometimes it does take the patient advocating on the behalf of other patients to say something. Share is an amazing program that does advocacy as well. Formulating and building Share and other organizations like Share are going to be ways that our other doctors recognize that we're in the room, right? But I think science as a whole recognizes that we can't do science just one way. There has to be a level of personalization. And therefore, in order to shift from after treatment to preventative treatment, we have to recognize that there are differences in communities.
You know, when we were planning this program, I asked you, and I would love for you to answer for everyone here. What has it been like for you to go from that high school chemistry class to now being the brilliant Dr. Melvin and actually researching triple negative breast cancer that somehow mutates more aggressively in Black women, that is killing Black women? What does that make you feel like when you are in the lab, when you are working on this for our community?
Well, number one, it makes me realize that because sometimes as scientists, including myself, I can get very narrow-minded and say, man, this experiment didn't work, right? Or man, my day is ruined. But when I open my vantage point and have conversations with you or have conversations with other patient advocates or even patients themselves, and they say, hey, this treatment option didn't work, but this one worked for me, and I'm so happy. Then it makes me realize, okay, Diva, that's who you're doing it for, right? You're not doing it because the experiment didn't work or you want another grant to be funded. You actually are doing it because people like you need it, right? And so it's a very humbling experience, and also it's a very kind of emotional experience because I'm not just doing it for myself, and I'm doing it for people that look exactly like me.
Right, right. And that is why, like, I'm just so thrilled that we connected. And you brought up one other point that I think many do not necessarily think about is, right, like those of us that do speak up and loud about it, there is that fear of retaliation or that fear of being targeted. And when I think about that in both in academia and in the medical space, and then really any type of profession, and then within the cancer space, it can be really hard when you are the token and you're very aware, like, okay, no one else looks like me. What are some, I guess, I don't know. I felt very validated when you said that. But
Mm.
what are some, I guess, ways that we can have these kind of conversations and gently guide those that don't look like us and say, look, this is not, we're not attacking you when we're saying the reality of our situation.
I think as a whole, you might that we might have to detach sometimes our backgrounds and say, okay, well, how do you think your patient outlook in 10 years would be if you start to service this community, right? Sometimes we have to take it away from like, okay, no, this is the Black community. And sometimes we have to look at the motivations of that organization, of that group, or of that institution and say, this is how listening to us can benefit you. Does that make them culturally aware? No, not yet. But if you keep showing up and they invite you back to the space and you then that is when okay, cultural awareness starts to seep in, right? But at first, sometimes you have to gear it as this is how, studying this type of disease structure or treating this patient population can benefit you as a whole. And then after you've shown up in that space, then you make your mark to, all right, this is how you should address these individuals when you talk to them. If you want them as a patient population, this is how you address them as such, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of education that we put on our backs when we become advocates because everybody isn't necessarily automatically willing to learn.
Right. You're right. And I love that you mentioned like the way something is presented. I often have told other partners, both, with my director hat on at Share and then as my, patient advocacy hat personally, is that certain things that you do for the white community or present for the white community, you cannot present that same information to the Black community. Like it needs to be tailored to us and spoken to us in words and images that resonate. And I feel we did such a beautiful job with that with our triple negative breast cancer postcard, because I was like, I don't see me represented. And
Right.
to see like a vision come to life like that and see how so many Black women were like, oh my God, I've never gotten anything like this before. I see myself in this. Like, talk about an impact, right?
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up here, and Sharon, I'll answer your question in a minute. What are some takeaways that you'd want our audience, both here today and those who will be viewing this on demand?
Yes. So overall, what I want to let you all know is that there are several resources that allow you to find a Black doctor. Now, these Black doctors are medical doctors, and sometimes they're linked to clinical trials, but maybe they're not always linked to clinical trials. However, they're going to be doctors within your region that are going to be able to treat you. Those links include, and those websites are National Medical Association.org, findablackdoctor.com, and blackdoctor.org. And the other thing, so that we can get more doctors and more scientists that look like us in the room, is send your child that is interested in a cricket to a STEM summer camp, right? Grow that STEM education in them and let them know that it might be hard, but you are on the right track because we need you to study that grasshopper, or we need you to study teeth, or we need you to study those volcanoes, right? Those spaces in science are waiting for us to occupy, and they need us. They really do. And so those are my main 2 points to take away. And of course, I see you all. I thank you all for listening to the little bit of information that I can provide. And I'm always here to partner with Share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melvin. And Sharon, I wanted to let you know your question about information on clinical trials for Black patients. So we have partnered with Touch the Black Breast Cancer Alliance. So they actually have clinical trials listed that are for Black patients. And of course, in doing searches, and don't be afraid to ask your cancer center, your doctor's office, hey, what are some clinical trials where I would be a good candidate? So that's another way of doing it too. But I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. And again, our fabulous Dr. Melvin. And let's see, we'll have a recording of this program available within 1 to 2 weeks. So make sure to check SHARE's website for that. And then also look up our next upcoming educational programs, our podcast episodes and support groups. And don't forget, follow us on social media as well. And this concludes our webinar. And again, Dr. Melvin, look at all the love you are getting in the chat. Just thank you so much for your time. And everyone, thank you for joining us today. Have a beautiful rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.